Right, wanting to go. There's about a 30-second delay between what happens here and what goes out on YouTube, I think.
Right.
So that's... Are we live now?
Looks like it.
Right, my screen still says waiting. Yes, we're live. We are live. Hello. Excellent. This is the obligatory opening to all YouTube podcasts, by the way. It's yes, we're live. So, and welcome to Nagra episode 2. I'm Chrissie Caulfield, and today I'm talking to Annie Jamieson, aka Dr. Sonic the Curator. Annie is Curator of Sound Technology at the National Science and Media Museum in Bradford, just down the road from me. For all those old synths and related interesting gear, they'll tell us some very interesting things about their collection. Hey.
Hello, everybody. Sorry, I'm having some slight sound issues here. I don't know if you're hearing me okay.
So, hello. How are you?
Hello.
Can you hear me? You can hear me fine. Hello. Welcome to the second ever Synth Natter.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very exciting.
It is. It's very exciting. So you're just back off, sort of half back off furlough.
Yes. The museum's been closed since March. I was working from home for some months, then I was furloughed for a couple of months. Now I'm partially unfurloughed part-time to ease back in, which is harder than I thought it would be, having not been working at all for 2 months. And then from next week, I will be back at work full-time, working from home.
Still from home.
Sorry, the museum will reopen on the 19th of August.
I shall look at that. I might have to go and pay visits. I've not been there for a while. See what's new. So tell us about your back. You get this job, which sounds fascinating to me, dealing with all this wonderful old equipment.
Well, it's quite a long story, but I'll try and keep it reasonably concise. But basically what it boils down to is that I'm kind of a thwarted front of house engineer. As a teenager, all I ever wanted to do in life was be a front of house engineer for rock and roll bands. But, you know, like I was 18. It was the 1980s. Not at all an easy gig to get into. And I sort of got put off after several harsh rejections for the usual sort of things, you know, because women can't hear properly and are trouble on tour and your hearing all goes to pot when you have your period and all of those sorts of things. So I kind of gave in a bit, stayed interested in it, but did lots of other things. And then sort of got back in a very roundabout way. So I did my PhD in history of technology. So I am kind of by profession, as it were, a historian of technology. And I reached a point after doing my PhD where I was able to do some sort of research at will, as it were, not being on a project for anyone else. And I was really interested in how particularly professional sound engineers and musicians deal with issues around hearing loss and hearing damage through their work. So I spent a couple of years working on a project that was looking at that, both historically and looking at how our understandings of the way that music can damage hearing just as much as industrial noise or any other noise potentially can. Looking at that in parallel with the development of large-scale live sound technologies, so big PA systems, really. That's my thing. I love a big PA system.
Don't we all?
but also looking at that along with a contemporary study. So I did quite a large online survey of several hundred professionals to try and start to understand what professionals understand about their risks to hearing and how they manage that. And that was really interesting, and I got some really good results out of it and so on. But unfortunately, didn't manage to get funding to continue with that. And was looking for another job as my contract was coming to an end, and the job at the museum came up. And at that time, there was no dedicated sound collection at the museum. It was the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television. But they were shifting towards a slightly more sort of STEM emphasis. And we're looking for an associate curator of science and technology who had some knowledge of both light and sound technologies. So I took a punt at that and got the job, amazingly. And kind of went in, and I was sort of a curator almost without portfolio. There wasn't a collection that I was responsible for that time. It was sort of partly my job to sort of see how we could bring more emphasis on the science and technology into the collections. And it just seemed to me that there ought to be a sound collection. It seemed to me that sound fits very well within the sort of collection of media that the museum covers. And so I was very fortunate that they were very receptive to that. I was able to start a sound technologies collection. It's deliberately got that vague name in order to cover anything I think that I might want to get in there, really.
Nice.
If you call it sound reproduction, then that limits the sort of things that might go in there. So technically a synthesizer wouldn't go in a sound reproduction collection because it's producing sound rather than reproducing. So the collection deliberately has that quite broad and vague name to allow for everything. And then I was very fortunate that after having started that collection and having a fairly aggressive campaign for sound in the museum in lots of different ways, they promoted me and actually made me curator of sound technology. So that is now my specific job title and the entire focus of my job now.
Excellent. What does I don't know what a curator does. What sort of, well, to quote an old TV show, what does a curator do all day?
Oh, lots of things. So one of you're responsible for your subject and your collection is probably the easiest way to put it. So I look after the sound technologies collection. I'm responsible for producing a policy for that collection and determining what kinds of things the museum collects in respect to sound technologies, for finding new things to bring in to the collection. Sometimes that's through offers. Occasionally people will contact us and offer things that they have. Because this is a new collection and it's not yet very well known that the museum does this, it's more about reaching out to people and finding things and sort of inviting people to donate or sell them to us. It's looking after the documentation for that collection and ensuring that we have accurate records and information, researching objects, and also not just the objects but the subject. So I'm involved in a number of research projects relating to sound in the museum. I have a PhD student who's working on investigating the best ways of interactives that help visitors to engage with sound technologies in the museum. Working with our learning team on educational type activities and advising them on sound related topics for their work in schools and so on. So just kind of pretty much everything to do with sound in the museum, really.
And of course, you do that as well, of course, because I went to the Fairlight.
Yes.
Last year was it?
Yeah, towards the end of last year, wasn't it? So yeah. So I do quite a lot of events which kind of reach out in two ways, really. Reaching out to visitors or potential visitors, but also reaching out to academia and industry, and often trying to bring those things together. So the Fairlight one that you mentioned, that was done in conjunction with Paul Harkin at the University of, not the University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh Napier University, as part of the Being Human Festival, which is the sort of AHRC funded festival about engaging the public with humanities research. And Paul's research is all about the Fairlight. So he was very excited that we have one, because he hadn't actually seen one in the flesh, even though his thesis was about the Fairlight. He'd not actually been able to see one in the flesh until he saw our Fairlight.
That sounds quite hard, researching something you've never seen. But I just there's plenty of documentation on it.
Yeah. I mean, quite a lot of us do it who do more historic research, because the things just don't exist anymore. But it can be quite difficult. So he was quite excited that we had a Fairlight. So we decided between us to put on that event that you came along to, and we were very lucky to also have Robin Scott, who donated our Fairlight Series 3, which was one of the first objects. I think it was the second object that came into the Sound Technologies collection. Robin Scott, for anyone who might not know, was formerly known as M, most popularly known for his hit single Pop Music. The Fairlight wasn't on Pop Music. That's a little bit too early for the Fairlight to have been on there. But Robin came along to the...
He was amazing.
He was amazing. I just really loved his story about trying to fit his first Fairlight in the back of a Porsche. That's just the most rock and roll story.
Yeah, problems that I'd love to have.
Yeah. So Robin came along and did a talk and was very engaging and helpful. We also had Rob Puricelli there, who probably a lot of viewers of this stream will know, who is kind of the Fairlight man in this country, really, in the font of knowledge on all things Fairlight. So a lot of the times those sorts of events are about bringing those people together, and making those connections, so that we kind of have those resources, really, that we can draw on for our research into the objects and for future projects. I kind of have in mind with our Fairlight, which came to us in working order, but with some sort of fault between the light pen and the CPU. I kind of have in mind that one day I want to do a sort of what I want to call performance fault diagnosis workshop, and actually get someone like Rob in to have a look at it for a kind of group of interested people, because I'm really interested in issues of maintenance, which are really important, and anyone who works with vintage synths will know they're not the sort of thing that just everybody can repair, and it's really to kind of promote those skills of being able to work with these kind of things.
This is why all the synths behind me are modern ones, because I can't be bothered getting old stuff repaired.
Yeah. So I'm kind of really interested in exploring issues around maintenance. And one day, if I can manage to get another small grant from somewhere, hopefully we'll at least diagnose the fault on the Fairlight. If not repair it, because that would depend on what it is, really.
Yes, that's always the thing with faults, isn't it? They end up being more complicated than you thought they were once you get deeper into them.
Yeah, it's the thing with faults, and it's also even more of an issue with museum objects, because replacing parts is not necessarily straightforward. And anything that involves sort of large scale replacement of parts is likely to not happen to a museum object, because it kind of damages the integrity of the object as it arrived. So it gets very complicated. But one of these days still, I'm hoping we'll do that. But we do, I mean, as I say, I've had a lot of different sort of events that we've done. And I'm very grateful to the museum, as I said, that they have been so receptive in my sort of campaign to let the world know that we do sound. We did an event for BBC Music Day last year. Yeah, last year. Which featured our Midas XL3 mixing desk, which is one of the key objects in my collection. And we had the designer of that mixing desk and its previous owner, John Burton, and various other people to sort of come and talk about this desk. We had it out on temporary display for the evening. We had an entire Lates event that was based on music. So for anyone that doesn't know, the Lates is an evening event at the museum for adults. So we open the doors in the evening and have a wide range of activities, from musical performances, drama, science experiments, demos, hands-on workshops, free beer usually, which is always good.
Already.
Yeah, I've just got to have the free beer. And they usually have a fairly loose theme, but last year we had a music-themed one. Where we had, for example, a dub sound system in the museum, and a talk about the history of dub in the West Yorkshire area. We had the Punjabi Roots Academy, drumming and dancing in the museum. We had grime DJs. We had a number of grad students from the University of York demoing some of their experimental instruments. We had what else did we have? The history of disco in New York and disco sound systems. So we're really doing everything we can to now do sound in the museum, and we're getting there gradually.
These events are amazing. My next question is, why am I not on this mailing list?
I don't know. You'll have to join the museum mailing list.
I will. I definitely will.
Or follow me on Twitter. I usually bang on about most things that are going on Twitter too. So yeah, it's we're getting there, and we would, in fact, in normal circumstances, I will be able to invite people to the 2 entirely sound-themed exhibitions that would be on in the museum right now.
Oh.
In other circumstances, one was due to open in April, and the other one was opened in July. But fear not, they will open next summer.
Good.
So keep an eye out. So we'll have 2 exhibitions. One is called Sonic Adventures in Audio, and the other is called Boom, Experiments in Sound. And between them, they are largely family-focused exploration of the science of sound. So Boom will cover understanding what sound is, how it's made, how it travels and behaves in space, how it's received and understood. So we kind of go from massive 19th century Koenig tuning forks through Fender Rhodes pianos, through a collection of reverb units and reverb interactives, to microphones, ears, so that it kind of gives our visitors a journey with a sound wave. You're kind of following the sound wave as it is made and travels and does its thing. And then Sonic Adventures in Audio is more about how, once you understand that and you understand what sound is and how it works, you can do amazing things with it, like synthesizers. So that's where all the synthesizers will be. So there is a section all about synthesizers. There will be, fingers crossed, effects of COVID allowing a patching interactive. We were working very hard just before the museum shut down on developing a physical patching interactive so that visitors can plug and unplug the cords and change the sounds. Again, with the whole COVID issue now, who knows what museums are going to be like this time next year in terms of hands-on interactive. So we'll see what happens with that. We'll also talk about the radiophonic workshop. We have some very nice objects from the radiophonic workshop in the collections, and we'll talk about those in that exhibition as well. And there will also be what we're calling our sound stage, where we've commissioned a set of sound performances and installations, especially for that exhibition, which vary from a kind of a sort of big duck DAW is probably the best way to call it within immersive sound installation, so that visitors can play around with what a DAW does, through to a beautiful piece which speaks to Helmholtz experiments on the elements of sound and breaking speech down into its sound elements to better understand it, which features, now can I remember, 12 speakers, each of which have a different frequency of a passage of speech, so that as you walk around the speakers, which will be in bird cages, hanging, ceiling, be lovely. So as you walk around, you actually hear the speech differently because you're getting the emphasis on different frequencies and so on. So there'll be a really nice range of different sort of sound works, which will be fantastic. And it will happen. It will open next July.
It will. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating that, we got so far and we were a month out from the opening of the first one when the museum was.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, it is. But, it'll be fine.
Yeah. Just have to be a bit patient about these things, don't we? Mm-hmm. So speaking of exhibitions, then you sent me some wonderful photographs about some of the things you've got in the exhibition. Do you like me to talk me through these? Tell me they all look as though they've got fascinating stories attached to them.
Yeah, I can probably say something about some of them.
Well, that just looks like a record. I'm sure it isn't.
Okay, is that there? Okay, yeah. So that is a vitaphone disc. So one of the things to point out probably is that prior to me being at the museum and having a sound technologies collection, there already were some really nice sound objects in the collections, but they were there because of their kind of relationship to either film or TV. So this is a film object, basically. So vitaphone discs were used in the 1920s for the soundtracks for films. They're amazing things. They're 16-inch shellac discs. They're huge, heavy, gorgeous things. They play from the inside out rather than the outside in.
Oh, wow.
And they hold 11 minutes on a side. It's 11 minutes because that was the length of the reel of film. So this one is from a film called Sunny, which was a musical film in the 1920s, and there are 8 discs and 8 reels.
So how do you sync all those up for the sound and picture?
So basically, both the film and the disc are marked with a starting point. So the projectionist has to very carefully line them up and then start them simultaneously. And we have at the museum in our store a vitaphone projector, which is a film projector which has a 16-inch turntable attached to it. And there is a sort of gearbox attached which keeps the turntable and the film projector running in sync, all being well. Obviously, particularly with discs, you only need the slightest speck of dust, the tiniest skip, and the sync is out, and that's it. You can't fix it. The projectionist would have had to change this 8 times in the course of the film. It's an amazing skill, and each time start them synchronously and try and keep them in perfect order. So yeah, that's a really interesting, really interesting object from the early history of film. 16-inch
discs are enormous. I was at the jazz museum in Southend-on-Sea a couple of years ago, and they just acquired some. I think they were 15-inch discs actually. It's hard to explain how big they are because you think, oh, it's just not much bigger than 12, but they seem huge. And this guy had to build a custom record deck just so that they could play them. So they had these discs in their museum for about 6 months or so until this guy built a record deck to play them because he couldn't find an original record deck.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
They're absolutely amazing things. And some of them, I don't think, no, this one in the image doesn't, but some of them actually have a counter around the label. So you tick off the number of times it's played because they're very fragile. And as I say, once you get the tiniest scratch, they're useless. So the projectionist would keep a record and tick the numbers off as he used the disc each time, so you knew how old it was and how much it had been used. It's just it's such a sad thing that the kind of art of the projectionist has been increasingly lost.
Yes.
In the early days, they were amazingly skillful at making this work. You can't imagine now sitting and watching a film and having 8 changes of real soundtrack.
Modern cinemas are almost unmanned these days, aren't they? They just start on a timer playing a thing off a hard drive.
Yeah,
I love the fact that at least Cottage Road Cinema here in Leeds, they do every month, or they did sadly when they were open. Hopefully they'll keep doing. They do a 35mm classics evening. And last thing I saw was the Apartment, Jack Lemmon film, on 35mm. It was just beautiful.
Yeah,
with old ads as well. The original, very old 35mm adverts. It was a total vintage experience. I should dress up next time I go.
Should probably just do a quick plug there for people who are into that sort of thing, because our Pictureville Cinema at the museum can play any format of film that ever existed other than IMAX.
Wow. But they've got an IMAX next door.
Yeah. So the only format that we can't play at all in the museum is IMAX on film, because our IMAX is now digital.
Okay. Right, yeah.
And IMAX projectors are too big to run parallel and keep the film one and the digital one. But yeah, we have a widescreen weekend festival every October, which obviously is largely dedicated to different widescreen formats. We can do Cinerama, we can do VistaVision, we can do any film format ever. So if you people watching it interested in that sort of thing, when the cinemas reopen, which will be from September, keep an eye out and come and see us.
Look forward to that, because I've been interested in film longer than I've been interested in since, oddly. So that really does interest me quite a lot. Right, so I think we all know what this next picture is. So no prizes.
Indeed, yeah. So my Fairlight. I know the collection's not really mine, but it's sort of mine. And yeah, I was obsessed with Fairlights. I think it might have been maybe the first or one of the very first times the Fairlight was kind of seen on TV outside of the sort of Tomorrow's World kind of features, and it was the Pet Shop Boys on top of the Pops. And I thought, what is that? And of course this was sort of pre-internet really, and you couldn't just Google and quickly find out what things are, so I had to kind of delve around for a while to find out what it was, and was sort of slightly obsessed with them ever after. And even though like my partner used to sort of do maintenance and restoration on vintage synths and so on, and even though I pleaded with him to try and let me buy one in a box and build it for me, he didn't want to do that. And I also before in a box, so you know. But then an email came through from the wonderful Robin Scott, not long after I started working at the museum, offering to donate this wonderful one to us. So, you know, how could I say no? So I kind of have a light of my own now.
That's a lovely thing. Oddly, I came to the Fairlight from a completely different angle. I'm a computer science geek professionally. And I read about this in a computer magazine of all things, because it's got a really radical architecture where it runs 2 6809 processors on alternating clocks phases, and that was just an immensely clever way of doing multiprocessing on a system that was not designed to do multiprocessing.
And
the only multiprocessing devices were massive mainframes in those days.
It's a wondrous thing in many ways, I have to say.
So clever.
and huge and heavy. Because I do of the events I do and so on, it's kind of been moved around quite a lot. So a number of times I wanted to get it out and display it temporarily for an event and so on. And our small but fierce conservator did christen it the Big Bloody Bastard. Fed up with continually having to kind of get it off the shelf and move it around and stuff, but you know. But yeah, it's a lovely thing. This particular one, this is a series 3. And it started its working life with Robin in a pre-production suite at Abbey Road. So obviously, you know, main studios at Abbey Road are really expensive to rent out. So you don't want to be messing about, arguing over who's taking the lead on a track, or, you know, do you want a brass section or a string section on this track? So the pre-production suite is where you can kind of hammer all of these things out at a much more affordable rate, so that by the time you start paying big money to go into the studio, the band kind of know what they're doing. So this Fairlight was in a pre-production suite at Abbey Road for, I think it was a little bit under 2 years. Don't know too much about everything it worked on. It was used in pre-production for the Liza Minnelli Results album that the Pet Shop Boys produced.
Wow.
We know that it was used on pre-production for that. Probably many other things, but we can't pin those down. But then obviously around about that time, sort of talking 1985, 6, things are moving so quickly that the Fairlight was very quickly superseded by cheaper, easier to use digital technology. So it came out of Abbey Road and was used by Robin for many years on lots of his recordings. And one of the wonderful things about this acquisition is that Robin also donated all of the tapes and discs, and all of both the system discs that, you know, have all the sounds on them, but also his own tapes and discs that he'd compiled and recorded things onto. So that's an amazing source. And there is actually an academic who's based in Australia called Sam Bennett, who's very interested in the Fairlight, and she's been over a couple of times now to investigate what's going on with our Fairlight, some of those materials. So it's a really wonderful thing to have.
It is extraordinary,
and it's kind of the heart of my collection. So.
Yes, I remember that seminar. It was just sat there in the corner. We couldn't do anything with it. I just admiring it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Particularly when kind of enthusiasts come to events like that, because I learned quite quickly to shout "Don't touch" very, very quickly as people come in the door, because people just can't resist. And it's understandable. Anywhere else you go, if you go to Synthfest, if you go to a dealer, wherever you go, you get hands-on with these things.
Yeah, I did a small performance at a university, just part of a conference, and I had my montage there. People just walked up and played it. Like, it was, hang on, don't fiddle with it. I'm playing. We were playing it in 10 minutes. Yeah. So I understand why people do that, but because it is a museum object, it has a whole different rules. Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, I can kind of physically see people like gritting their teeth to save themselves from getting hands-on with things. But it's a popular object too. I did a talk at one of our latest events about it, which was basically just going down the rabbit hole of where you can hear the Fairlight and tracing lots of the classic sounds on lots of the 80s tracks that you hear them on. And I'll be honest, I thought it would be a little bit, you know, like 3 people and a dog would turn up for it. But actually the room was overspilling. We were having to turn people away. It was really, really popular. Which, you know, is kind of good for me, because these things all help to show the museum that there really is appetite for these sorts of objects and topics. Yeah, and the more successful things are, the more we're able to do. So
yeah, that's really good to hear. think it's quite shocking how difficult to use Page R was to try and build things in there. It was just the most amazingly fiddly thing I've ever tried to use. And people beat whole songs on this, like, you know, half of Kate Bush albums were done on that thing. It's just astonishing.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about it is when I did that sort of public talk for kind of non-specialists, you know, most of whom had never even seen a fairlight, the one question everyone has about it is how do you play it? Because you can see people trying to go, so is it one hand on the piano keyboard and one hand on the computer keyboard? Is it? Which is really interesting for me, because a lot of the time with a lot of my objects, most visitors to the museum won't know of them. They won't have seen them before. So when you think about putting things on display, you're always having to think about how you get this object to speak to people who have no idea what it is or what it does. So it's always good to get that insight into what other questions people ask when they see it.
Yes.
It's the thing you can tell them that is going to kind of attract them to it and get them to engage with it more. Yeah. So, I mean, the fairlight's a two-person job, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Probably two-person job to lift it as well, from what you said.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I have a specialist volunteer whose job it is to come in and help me move the fairlight and similar objects when I need them moving.
Good plan. So next up, we got these strange of collection here of stuff with a wonderful label, "Do Not Fiddle With," which
So
is that your label?
Sorry?
Is that your label, or did it come with it?
Oh, it came with that label, yeah. So that's some of our radiophonic workshop objects. So we have something in the region of 40 of these sorts of objects, which were basically things that were used to make a sound that would be the start of something that the radiophonic workshop would produce. So some of them are musical instruments. You can see there's like a tambourine and an ocarina.
Swanee whistle at the bottom there, isn't it? Yeah.
Whistle, yeah. There's a percussion beater there, and there's a wide variety of different kinds of percussion mallets and beaters. Things like little bells, kettle whistles, you name it. Random springs, bits of metal that were hard to catalogue because I don't know what it is. It's a bit of metal. You probably drop it. And it
goes under B in the catalogue then.
Yeah. It was quite interesting though, because this collection wasn't fully catalogued when I started at the museum, and one of the first things I did was to try and catalogue all of these things individually. My friends on Facebook were amazingly helpful. I would just post a picture going, "What is this?" And someone would go, "Oh, it's a clamp for a hi-hat cymbal. It does this," or it's a bass guitar string, probably G, and I think it's flat wound, but I can't quite see the detail in the picture. So it's really helpful to kind of have those sort of resources.
Wisdom of crowds.
So yeah, there are all sorts of these bits and pieces, quite a few of which will be on display in the exhibitions next year. The Do Not Fiddle, that is a tape guide, and the radiophonic workshop used to do a lot of very long tape loops, and they would run tape loops down the long corridors at Maida Vale. For anyone who's not been there, Maida Vale was built as a roller skating rink. So it's basically a very long oval building, so it's got really long corridors. So the people in the radiophonic workshop would run very long tape loops, and they would have like a tape guide on a mic stand 30 feet down the corridor or something. And people would fiddle with them, because people who weren't involved in the workshop would think, "What is going on? What's happening here?" So they would put these stickers on it saying, "Do not fiddle with them." So yeah, that's a very original BBC Radiophonic Workshop sticker. So yeah, we have these boxes of stuff which are interesting, because there's sort of, when you think about how to interpret them, because there's sort of an inclination for a lot of people to think, well, you could have the sound of them. You could maybe have pictures on a touch screen, and you can touch the screen and hear the sound. And it's like, but that's not how the Radiophonic Workshop works. You don't really ever hear the sound of a swanny whistle, because it's been so manipulated and played with and looped and cut and spliced and whatever that it's probably unrecognisable as a swanny whistle by the end of it. Yeah. So they're quite challenging objects, but one of the other projects we have going on at the moment is the Sonic Futures project, which is with James Mansell at the University of Nottingham. And in that we took 3 objects or sets of objects from our collections, and commissioned musicians and artists and makers to work closely with audience groups at the museum to develop interactives that would help people to understand these objects. And one of those is the Radiophonic Workshop objects. Again, that project was just kicking off as the museum closed for COVID-19. So it's changed slightly, but all of the outputs now are going to be digital. So there will be digital interactives. And Caro C and David Bultby are working on a digital interactive for the Radiophonic Workshop objects, which will be available online in the foreseeable future, in the next few months. So if people want to keep an eye on the Facebook and Twitter feeds for the museum or for me, you will see when that and the other digital interactives are available. And you can have an explore and a play around with them.
Excellent. So go and follow now. So this next one is Stuart's favourite thing. He's been going on about it ever since he saw it. That's the Crystal Palace.
Oh, the Crystal Palace is a wondrous thing, yeah. So have we got, yeah,
there it comes.
So yeah, this is another Radiophonic Workshop object. A number of these were built by Dave Young at the Radiophonic Workshop in the 1960s. It's called Crystal Palace because it's in this Perspex box. And it's basically a kind of sequencer. So it uses a capacitive fader to basically fade things in and out in sequence. So it's got a set of connections that you can just see in the image there, and you plug your sound sources up to 16 sound sources that would generally have been either reel-to-reel tape players or turntables. So you plug your sources in your chosen order, and then as the fader, the capacitor rotates, it fades those sounds in and out.
That's brilliant.
The order in which you put them in. So if you plug them in the right order and get the speed right, it's kind of doing what a sequencer does.
Wow. But with actual piece of the physical hardware.
Yeah, literally. It's an incredible thing. And I think there were 5 of these made altogether. And this one came to the museum with most of the rest of the Radiophonic Workshop objects we have in 2012. We also have some of the large Philips tape machines that we used in the Radiophonic Workshop. We don't have pictures of those, unfortunately, at the moment. Oh. So yeah, we've got a number of kind of bits and pieces from the Radiophonic Workshop. Unfortunately, when it was closed, the equipment was sort of dispersed in a number of different ways. So we don't have everything we might have wanted from there in a perfect world. But hey, we've got some really nice things. So.
Yeah, that's good. Am I right in thinking just out here that one of those was used for ORAC or something very similar used for ORAC in Blake 7, or at least inspired it? So I'm not sure which. Possibly. I'm not 100% certain, but I wouldn't be surprised. sort of reuse that the BBC would do, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, why not? I guess you have these amazing things.
Yeah, put some Christmas tree lights in it. Good jobs are good.
LED lights on it, that would be nice. Sadly, conservation is just from putting LED lights on things.
Oh gosh, yes. Yes, that was counterpoint. Sorry, sacrilege, wouldn't it? Next, a blue thing.
A blue thing indeed, yeah. So this is a electronic Notron sequencer. This is an amazing thing. This will be in the exhibition next year. So this is one of the objects that comes from the wider Science Museum group collections. So the Science and Media Museum is part of the Science Museum group. And each museum has its own collections, but they're also sort of considered to be one collection. So we kind of borrow from each other's collections. And this is one of the objects they have there. It's really interesting because it was made in Bradford, a sort of relatively short-lived company. And it's very trivial, I know, but one of the most wonderful things about it is the colour. It arrived, we had it brought up from London in preparation for the exhibition. And I opened the box and I was just like, wow, because it glows. It looks beautiful.
Oh, wow.
And the picture really doesn't do it justice.
It does look in good nick, though. It looks very smart. I don't know whether you cleaned it up or not. It looks fantastic.
No, that's kind of how it came to us. It is very clean, very nice condition. So we can. It's so lovely that we actually rearranged the plan for the exhibition slightly to give it a slightly more prominent position, because we thought people are going to see that at the other side of the room and go, "What is that?"
Yeah, yes. So also being local interest. What's the date on that? When's that from?
It's 1987, I think. I should remember that.
Gosh.
No. I might have a note somewhere just to quickly check for you.
Does look very shiny.
Oh, sorry, it is late. Excuse me, it's later than that. It's about 97, 98.
97.
I think.
Right.
Yeah. So, if anyone is watching and can actually point me to any widely available recording that features this, I'd be ever so grateful. From what we can find out, we know that the Human League did use one of these at one point. Apparently Björk has used them quite a bit.
Oh.
But we've not been able to find any sort of identifiable recording. And one of the things we're doing with this exhibition is we're going to have a sort of listening station so that people can hear a track, hopefully something they might recognise for each of the objects that's in there, just to give them an idea of what these objects would have sounded like when used in real life. And we've not really managed to pin anything down for this. So if anyone has any thoughts, please feel free to let us know.
Definitely, that's a beautiful device. And built in Bradford as well. I who knew they built things like that in Bradford?
Yeah, I didn't know at all until I came across this in the catalogue at the museum and thought, oh, there's a thing. What's this about? So, yeah, we like that.
Definitely. Hopefully you can find a synth made in Bradford as well so you can attach to it.
Yeah. Oh, this one. So this again is another of the objects from the wider group. This is a triadex Muse from the early 1970s. And this was built at MIT. It was designed by Marvin Minsky and Edward Friedkin. And it's a sort of synthesizer cum digital sequencer. Technically, it's sort of one of the first digital sequencers. And it was sort of designed more as a sort of aid to composition for experimental music rather than a musical instrument per se. there were not very many of them made, and they're not very sort of well known, really. It's quite interesting because it's sort of one of the sort of earliest examples of a sort of algorithmic music machine, really. So you set all the sliders to different values, and it will start to create a loop based on those values.
Okay, that is very MIT.
Yeah. The loop can be years long. Its algorithm is sufficiently complex that, you know, it will not repeat itself a very long time, apparently. So yeah, that's a very
Eat your heart out, John Cage.
Thing. Yeah. Well, he'd either have loved or hated it, wouldn't he, I guess?
Yeah.
That's where he'd go.
That's brilliant. It looks like a book from this angle. It's just the way like a very large open book.
Yeah, it's a very interesting shape, and I don't really know why it's that sort of triangular shape. Why? I guess a lot of people would have just put it in a box. But yeah, they chose to do it that way, which is lovely.
Is that the speaker on the left there? So it's a built-in speaker.
Yeah.
Or is that something?
I think it's a built-in speaker. Probably not fabulous quality, I guess.
No.
But it gives you an idea of what is happening.
Brilliant. Let me say that. Fantastic. Can't speak. Fascinating thing. So next up we have a Wasp, which is yellow and black, of course. Those Wasps tend to be.
Yeah. So the Wasp is a British synthesizer from 1978. There's also I couldn't find a nice image for it, but we also have the spider sequencer that goes with it. And it was made by a company called Electric Dream Plant. It's interesting because it was one of the first kind of significantly sort of affordable synths. When this came out, it cost £199, which was not an insignificant amount of money in 1978-79, but the sort of, you know, 10,000 quid you could be paying for some synthesizers at the time. And it has a touch keyboard. It's got a touch sensitive keyboard, which is fairly radical at that point in time. And they're interesting little things. They're not, you know, they don't necessarily make beautiful sounds like some synths do, but they make really interesting sounds, and they were really popular with quite a lot of people. They also just look amazing, and this will also be in the exhibition next year. And it's one of the things we were kind of thinking about, because our exhibition is not for a specialist, knowledgeable, sort of enthusiast audience. Again, we need to think about how we get people to engage with things that, to be fair, might just look like a lot of black boxes with keyboards on.
Yeah, you know, there's a danger with that, isn't there? Yes.
Average kind of normal person who's not a geek. So we did a lot of thinking about how to choose the synths we display in ways that can make them interesting. So this one, for example, is interesting because of the price issue. The fact that this was so much more affordable than most of the synths available at the time is significant, and frankly because of the way it looks, because it looks interesting, and it will attract people. And it's, you know, for us, a lot of it is about presenting things in a way that makes people stop and learn more about them. So yeah, something that's kind of black and yellow and looks kind of waspy and has a beautiful instruction manual that comes with it that looks like a comic book. It's printed in black on yellow paper, and the cover is like a so those are the sorts of things that we use to sort of draw people in a little bit. What we don't want is someone sticking their head in a gallery and going, it's a load of old pianos or something, not bothered, and walking away.
Yes.
Because we know they're fantastic once people know a little bit about them. But it's that hook, really, just getting people to come along and pay attention to them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the little pictures of wasps on it as well. It's quite, makes it very... I like when people put that extra level of detail onto a device.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. I'm amazed how light it is compared to anything else in my collection. It literally weighs nothing. It's like you pick it up and you do this. How is it here? It's just, there you go.
That'd make a change from listening to Fairlight.
Yes, quite so.
This is very steampunk.
This is completely the other end of the scale, isn't it? So this is Helmholtz apparatus for the synthesis of the human voice. So this was designed by Hermann Helmholtz in the 19th century, round about 1880-ish, give or take. It was built by Rudolf Koenig, who's a very famous instrument maker who built a lot of acoustic instruments, some of which will be on display next year, including this. So this is a machine that was designed to help Helmholtz explore the phenomenon of timbre. So he was trying to work out how is it that you can have a middle C played on a piano and a middle C played on a flute, and those notes are the same pitch, but they don't sound the same. What is it that makes them sound different? And he was particularly interested in that in relation to human speech. So this is a device that he designed, and it basically has a set of tuning forks, which have a pure tone and then the first 6 overtones of that tone. And the tuning forks are vibrated by an electromagnet, and they each have a Helmholtz resonator, which are the brass cylinders that you see, with a shutter that's operated by the keys on the little keyboard you can see at the front there.
Oh, it's a keyboard. Oh gosh, yeah.
Yes, very tiny.
Just tell.
Keyboard.
God, how big is this? How big is that thing then?
The whole thing is really quite big. It's in round numbers. It's about 2 meters by a meter. It's a big old thing. So by varying the relative intensities of the different overtones, i.e. using the keys to kind of turn the shutters on and off, you can simulate different timbres, and particularly vowel sounds of human speech were the sounds that Helmholtz was really interested in. And that actually is how he discovered that it is the overtones that create the timbre. So that's why the flute and the piano are playing the same fundamental frequency, but they have different sets of overtones that you can hear. And that's what makes the notes sound distinctly different. So it is a synthesizer, but not quite in the way that we would describe a synthesizer now.
I suppose it's an additive synthesizer, isn't it? A bit like the organ, so tone wheel organ.
Yeah. And if you look on YouTube, I can't remember quite where it is, but there is somewhere that has one of these, and you can hear it working.
Oh.
I think that one is possibly somewhere in Canada. But yeah, it's quite an amazing thing, and it's one of several objects we'll have that demonstrate this real enthusiasm, particularly in the later 19th century, for experimenting with sound and trying to understand what sound is and how it works, and how we can distinguish different types of sound and that sort of thing. So that should be very exciting.
Yeah, that's lovely. I just love that steampunk look of it.
Yeah, just wait till you see it for real. It's astonishing.
Yeah. I
One
can't
of
wait.
the nice things about being a curator is you kind of see images of things, and then you actually get to go and look at the real thing in the stores, and you just sometimes it literally is you take the lid off the box and go like, oh, wow. Other times it's quite disappointing, and you open it up and go, oh really? Okay, so this is another.
Love the lighting on this. The cinematographer in me loves the lighting on this picture.
Yeah, well, you see, I have to tell you, this is a very special photograph because the policy in the museum is that we do not turn objects on, ever. Well, we can in very special circumstances, but on the whole, we do not turn objects on. But when this object came in, and we had it photographed straight away whilst we had some burly operatives on hand to help us move it, because it does weigh 375 kilos.
Oh,
yeah.
oh, that's incredible.
But our photographer was kind of so excited about it that, as was our conservation manager who helped us with it. So we did just turn it on just so we could get this picture of it fired up with all the lights on.
It is beautiful.
Doesn't happen often. So this is a Midas XL3 mixing desk. It is to some the classic live mixing desk. It's from 1990. This one is actually serial number 003 of 1,000 that were ever made, and we're probably the oldest one remaining. 001 was a prototype that never left the manufacturer. That I have heard a rumour that 002 is languishing in a very poor state in a dodgy club in France somewhere, but that is unconfirmed. And this is 003, and it's an amazing thing, and it has a fabulous story that it came with. So this was bought by a company called Encore PA Hire in London. In 1990, its first few years, it did pretty much all of the major gigs around London. It was used for Prince at Earl's Court. It was used for James Brown at Wembley. It's been used for Nina Simone, for the Rolling Stones, for anyone you can imagine, really. Then it went into the Forum in Camden in London. And it was the main front of house desk there for about 10 years, and used for most bands that went through there. And then it was sold to John Burton, who is a XL3 and general analog enthusiast. He used it most notably probably with the Prodigy. So this toured with the Prodigy for the last sort of 6-7 years of its working life before it came to us. And it is a thing of wonder.
It certainly is. Wow. I'm so glad you switched it on. Well, there's just the ones that looks, that is an amazing photograph.
Yeah.
And a brilliant history, fantastic device. And keys into your earlier ambitions of being a front of house engineer as well. You sit there and pretend to play with it.
Yes, indeed, yeah. And it's from a museum's point of view, it's really useful because we know its full history. We're in touch with everyone who has owned it.
Brilliant.
We've got a lot of information about people that have used it, so we can actually have a really rich record of it. And that, of course, helps us when we come to display it, because we've got as much information as you could ever hope for to tell stories about this object. And it's the stories really that bring people in and get them interested in the objects.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're sort of the geek who loves the gear, the stories bring it to life more, I think. That really sort of, you feel as though it's been somewhere and done some useful work with real music. And I like that. We're slightly over our hour, so I hope you're okay. If you're okay for a bit longer.
If you are, yeah.
Lovely, yes, good, lovely.
So this again is another object from the Science Museum collections in London. This is the keyboard, in inverted commas, an EMS Synthi K. So it's again another touch-sensitive keyboard. This is another one that we brought up for the exhibition, because one of the points that we want to make is that once you have electronic sound and you can create and manipulate it electronically, you could do anything you want with it, and you can trigger it or interface with it in any way you want. You no longer are reliant on having a string or a pipe or a skin or whatever else you would have needed. So we're having a number of objects that demonstrate different ways to interface with electronic instruments. So this keyboard from 1971 is one of those examples. That's going to be displayed with things like a theremin, probably an Ableton push controller, that type of thing. So there will be a section which will be about the different ways that you can trigger an interface with sound. And this is just, again, an amazing thing to look at. It's just...
So what's that? What would that connect to? An EMS Synthi or a VCS3 or something?
Yeah, I think you can kind of connect it, I think, to any of the EMS synths. There weren't very many of them made, and I don't know how effective they were. Or if they
the
were...
VCS3 probably not very, having played one.
Yeah.
It's almost heretical to say so, but I played it and I think thought it was a terrible instrument. But they were built down to a price, weren't they? Yeah.
Although I do know someone who had a lifelong ambition to use a Synthi 100, and a couple of years ago he actually just fortuitously got the opportunity to use two different ones within a period of a couple of months, and was desperately disappointed because
yeah, they were not good. They were seriously not good. Stop looking after these devices, geeks. They were terrible. They were built to be the price of a Fender Stratocaster, and you can't build a synthesizer in those days for that money. This is why Moog made the money. Yeah, put them in museums. That's where they belong. Give them some money. Oh yes, and this next one brings back some memories for me. This is the Watkins Copycat, though yours looks older than mine.
Oh yeah, I love my Watkins Copycat. Yeah, so one of the many things I'm interested in is the kind of phenomenon of reverb and echo and how that's used, and the different ways that people have tried to emulate or create different sorts of reverbs and echoes. So I'm sort of starting a little collection, and I was fortunate to get 3 vintage reverb units from a local semi-pro musician who's kind of been on the circuit for many years and has storage lockers full of gear. So I managed to persuade him to part with some of it. So we got a couple of Binson Echorecs, and we got this little Watkins Copycat. He hadn't had it from new. I think he'd had it since about the 1970s, 1980-ish. As far as I can tell, this is a pretty early one. I think it's about 62, 63 or thereabouts. The knobs on it had been changed. It wouldn't have had the chicken head knobs on it. And it was researching this whereby I learnt that chicken head knobs are called chicken head knobs. Who knew? Not me, obviously, but I do now. So yeah, it's a really nice thing, and I think it pairs nicely. I think I did I send an image of the Binson as well, or not? So yeah. I think it pairs nicely with that, because one of the things we want to try and get across in the collection is it's not always about the really expensive, really precious things. Often it is about the cheaper, more everyday, more widely used things that are just as important in historical terms, sometimes more so. You could definitely argue that something that many thousands of people were able to use is kind of more historically important than something that a handful of people ever were able to use.
Yeah, because even I had a Watkins Copycat in the 80s to play with my dodgy CBS Fender Stratocaster. I got a picture of one. This isn't actually mine, but that's the sort of model mine was the red case. Well, that's a lot cleaner than mine was, and I got mine second hand in a local second hand shop in Hull, and I loved and hated it in equal measure. So I sort of loved that it was. I've always loved delays and reverb effects like you, and I wanted one because I wanted to play like Steve Hackett at the time. I was didn't we all? Well, but and that was my way of trying it, but it was so unreliable and so noisy and so wobbly. Yeah. As soon as I could afford a digital echo, I got one. But yeah, it was nice and cheap. You could afford it. I don't think I paid very much for mine. I didn't sold it for even less because I don't think it worked properly. Even though it had spare tape loops
Right.
at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So another of the interactives from the Sonic Futures project was around reverb. So that will also be appearing as a digital interactive very soon. I think that will be up on the website for people to interact with. I've already had a go with it. It's fab. It's really
brilliant
to play with, and it will work on phones or any devices. So again, keep an eye out for that. And again, that's one of these things. We hoped that would be a physical interactive, and we would work with Nina Richards, who's building that for us.
Oh, I know Nina, yes.
To actually have a physical hands-on interactive, but things have changed. It will now be digital, and we'll maybe work further on that in the future to work that back up into a physical one.
Right. We're hoping to get Nina and or Zoe onto a future synth letter, by the way.
That would be fab. Yeah, they would be great, I'm sure. So this is a Nagra SM tape recorder. This is one of the most beautiful objects you will ever see in your life.
Nagras are always beautiful.
They're always beautiful. But this is a smallest beautiful one. Should have put a pound coin next to that image, really, shouldn't I? So that is roughly the size of a piece of A5 paper. Probably a bit smaller, I think. It's very tiny. The whole base of it is machined out of a single block of aluminium, and it's just so beautiful to look at and beautiful to hold with gloves on, obviously. So you can't touch it without gloves. So this is another of one of the early objects I acquired for the collection. The Nagra SM was originally designed by Nagra at the behest of the Kennedy administration in the US during the Cold War, and they were used a lot for espionage, because you could kind of slip it in your pocket and have a tiny little lapel mic and do covert recording. They were also used a fair bit in film and TV before sort of radio mic technology was better. If you were in a situation where you couldn't really use a boom mic for reasons of space or whatever, you could use a Nagra and record dialogue with hidden microphones on the actors. And we think that's what this one was used for. As far as we know, it came from the BBC. We did actually buy this on eBay. People are sometimes surprised. Yes, museums do buy things on eBay. And we bought this from someone who, I think it was his uncle or his grandfather, had worked for the BBC, and sometimes things wander and end up in people's homes eventually. So yeah, we think this one came from the BBC, but it is just a really lovely thing. And we have some other Nagras in the collection, some larger ones, so it's a nice contrast to those. And again, it's interesting in terms of the different sorts of formats, different ways of recording that are represented in the collections, and there will be some examples of kind of different formats and what they've meant to the ways that we use recordings and listen to them in the exhibitions next year.
I'm trying to work out the width of the tape on that. It looks too narrow to be 1/4 inch if that's quite small. Is that sort of cassette type width tape?
Yeah, I would say it's probably about the same as cassette, I think. I should know exactly off the top of my head, shouldn't I? But I don't know.
It's been a long time. And here's the Binson Echorec, which you mentioned.
Yeah. So the Binson is a magnetic disc delay. It's an Italian company. Really the other end of the scale from the copicatt. Much more expensive. Seemingly much kind of sturdier and long-lived.
Less noisy, less wobbly.
Yeah. Famously used by a lot of people, but most famously by Dave Gilmour.
Wow.
particularly for a lot of the earlier Pink Floyd, he often used 2 Echorec. As I say, we bought these together with the copicatt from a local semi-pro musician. So we have 1 valve one and 1 transistor. This is the valve one, I think. So yeah, they're just still very, very sought after. Very sort of emulated. You can get sort of Binson plugins. You can get Echorec emulating pedals. Just really, really kind of iconic and very desirable.
I think there's a section on my GT1000 pedal that does this. Yes.
Yeah. So really, really lovely things. And part of an interesting story, as I say, of how we've tried to kind of capture and emulate reverb and echo, and how it's kind of changed from initially simply trying to recreate a natural echo when you don't have it in your recording studio, through something like Dave Gilmour using 2 of these to create sounds that would never ever kind of exist unaided in nature, and it becomes something completely new and a kind of creative use, as opposed to just trying to substitute for a natural sound we don't have.
Unless inconvenient, they're getting John Helliwell to play a saxophone in the toilet, which he did on Supertramp's Breakfast in America, I think. Just to get the sound.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think why we want that so much, and how actually if you hear any sort of recording without reverb, it just sounds weird. Even if people don't recognise what it is, it's like, that's something wrong with that. Why is that not right? Because we just become conditioned to hear some degree of reverb on pretty much any music we ever listen to.
Well, I play violin, and you cannot record a violin without using reverb. It just sounds awful, because violins are used to be played in large concert halls.
Yeah.
So I'm very picky about reverbs and delays for my violin, because otherwise it just doesn't work. It just sounds horrible.
Yeah, it's just.
But it might just be my playing.
It's just. I think it's interesting that without being aware of it at all, often people know about reverb and how much people can tell about where something is just by hearing reverb on it. And we'll be playing around with those sorts of ideas in the exhibition as well. And we also will be borrowing from Leeds Museum's a mute violin. That's the skeleton violin that basically doesn't resonate because it doesn't have a body, in order to practice more quietly with it.
Yes.
Which is a really cool thing.
Excellent. So how I use my electric violin when the neighbours are in. Yeah.
Because they're not the friendliest of things, really, violins.
They're not. No, mine's quite loud, actually, when it's played, which is great for playing concerts, but not particularly good for practicing, particularly when you're learning something new and difficult.
Yeah. Or when your neighbour's children are learning something difficult.
Yes. Oh, God, I pitied my parents. Anyway. That was lovely. Thank you very much for that. It's brilliant. You've answered some questions here, but you've answered most of them already. I've got a little question here. If you could take one synth home from the museum, which would it be? But I think I know what that is.
Kind of would have to be the Fairlight, wouldn't it?
It would, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, we've got an OBXA, which I love very much too.
I remember seeing that. Yeah.
It's got to be the Fairlight.
So, do you have synths at home? Do you
have one?
You have one.
I have a Roland D50.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we have a tricky relationship, me and my Roland D50.
It's a hard device to get to know, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. My ambition was to be completely proficient with it after I'd been on furlough, because I would have nothing to do but devote time to working out how to actually get it to do anything I want it to do. That hasn't quite worked out, but it's still here. We'll get there eventually. in the end.
Persistence. Yeah, I've got a DO5 and I have similar trouble with it. It's a lot of work. It's just easier to go and get an analog synth or a nice modern digital and just say, yeah, I know what I can do with this one.
Yeah, I think I just have this one because it came up. I was able to get it from a friend for a very, very reasonable price. And I was like, okay, yeah, why not?
Why not? Yeah,
it's nice to have one for myself instead of buying them for the museum.
Yes.
So yeah, we'll get there in the end.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for coming along, Annie. It's been really interesting. You're going to plug your Twitter account so we know where to find you in the museum.
So I am at Annie K Jamieson on Twitter, or if you search for Sonic the Curator, you'll find me. The museum is at Media Museum on Twitter. And if you go to the museum's website, you can sign up to the mailing list for news of events and so on.
Do that now.
Yeah, do it now.
I will.
And yeah, if you follow those, you will, one way or another, find out about all the synth and sound related things that will be happening when service starts to return to normal. Also, if you follow the museum account, we have been having a series of sort of Sonic Fridays that one of our PhD students who's working with us has been running, Stefania, where each Friday we have a sound theme and ask for people's thoughts and contributions. So we've done, so far there've been sounds of lockdown and what are the characteristic sounds and sounds that have meant something to you. I think last week it was Vinyl Friday, we had a cassette day, so that will still be continuing. So you can follow along with those and join in and contribute your thoughts and ideas about those themes.
Excellent, we should all do that. So thank you very much, Annie, for being on our second ever Synth Natter.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for everybody for watching. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next one, which I think is going to be Matthew Bourne. Bye for